The void remembers what we forget. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the patrol cutter Vigil, a place that felt more like a shrine than a command deck. Before them, framed in the reinforced plasteel viewport, the obsidian anchorage turned slowly against the chaotic swirl of the Tartarus eddy. It was a structure of impossible geometry, a stellated dodecahedron of polished black material that drank the nebula's light. Ancient sigils vast enough to swallow her ship pulsed with a barely perceptible amber energy deep within its surface. The anchorage was a myth given form, a relic from the dawn era of humanity, and her sworn duty to protect. The stakes were simple and absolute. Keep it pristine until the judiciary fleet arrived. Themis, the Vigil's logic core, spoke in a calm, synthesized tone that grated against the tension. Commander, revised projections remain unchanged. The Kith Gil Jakal fleet will translate from hyperspace at the system's legal limit in 97 minutes. Their force disposition is estimated at 3 cruiser-weight vessels and 5 frigate-class escorts. We are outmatched by a factor of 12 to 1. Rostova's jaw tightened. She knew the numbers. She hated the numbers. They were clean, logical, and utterly devoid of hope. The hum of the ship's life support was a low, constant prayer against the encroaching silence. "Maintain the broadcast, Themis," she ordered, her voice betraying none of the cold dread coiling in her gut. Article 7, Section 4 of the Interstellar Heritage Preservation Act. The Obsidian Anchorage is a protected archaeological site. No salvage, no survey, no approach within 1 million kilometers without judiciary authorization. A signal repeater at the edge of the system dutifully beamed her warning on a loop. It was a legal fence made of whispers, and she knew the Jakal were bringing hammers. The sleeping arrays of the anchorage seemed to watch them, vast and indifferent. Dr. Eris Thorne, the mission's sole xenoarchaeologist, leaned over his console, his reflection a pale ghost on the screen. "They don't see a historical treasure, Eva. They see a mountain of exotic matter and dawn-era technology. They'll strip it down to its girders and melt it for scrap." His fingers traced the glowing outline of one of the sigils on his display. It was the mark of the Saint ships, the fabled judge constructs, that had brought order to the chaos after humanity's first catastrophic expansion. A legend whispered in academies and dismissed in fleet headquarters. Legends were the ghosts of forgotten truths. Rostova ran a hand over the worn leather grip of her command chair. The Vigil was a good ship, tough and reliable, but it was a border patrol cutter. It was designed to chase smugglers and deter pirates, not to face down a corporate fleet flying under a flag of convenience. "Jax, what are our tactical options?" Her tactical officer, a young man with old eyes, shook his head slowly. "Run. We can use the eddy's gravimetric tides to mask our exit. Or we can fight, and our operational lifespan will be measured in seconds, not minutes." The cold, hard reality of it settled in the recycled air. Her duty was not to fight and die. It was to protect the anchorage. But how could she do one without the other? Themis interjected, its synthesized voice a scalpel of pure reason. "The law is a framework for orderly conduct between consenting parties, Commander. The Kith Gil Jakal are demonstrating every precursor to non-consent. Precedent suggests they will find a legalistic loophole to justify their actions after the fact." Rostova stared at the silent black monolith. It had seen empires rise and fall. It had seen laws written and then ground to dust. A civilization is defined by the laws it chooses to uphold when they are inconvenient. They will have to break the law first, Themis, in plain sight. And we will be the witnesses. Aris looked up from his console, a strange fire in his eyes. "Maybe more than witnesses, Commander. The legends, They called the anchorage a ledger, a mirror. They said it didn't act, it reacted. It didn't punish, it balanced. Jack scoffed, the sound sharp and cynical. With all due respect, Doctor, we need weapons, not riddles. And that thing has been dark for 10,000 years. The silence on the bridge felt heavy, ancient. The first civilian vignette filtered through the comm buffer, an automated relay from a nearby colony. It was a child's classroom, broadcast a history lesson. The Dawn-era humans, a cheerful teacher's voice explained, believed that justice was not a proclamation, but a mathematical constant. Their greatest constructs, the Saint ships, were built to prove it. Rostova listened, her gaze fixed on the unmoving star form before them. The teacher's voice faded, replaced by the sterile hiss of the comm. The lesson felt like a message from the deep past, a reminder of what was at stake. A low-frequency vibration hummed through the deck plates. It was so faint Rostova almost missed it, a subtle resonance that seemed to emanate not from her own ship, but from the void outside. Themis, source that vibration, she commanded. The AI's optical sensors on the bridge pulsed a soft blue. The resonance originates from the anchorage commander. Power levels are increasing from 0.001% of baseline to 0%. The change is statistically insignificant, yet persistent. Insignificant to a machine. To Rostova, it felt like a sleeping giant stirring in its slumber. The universe does not care for intent, only for action. Eris Thorne was practically vibrating himself, his hands flying across his console. It's responding not to us, but to the system broadcast, the legal citation, the Heritage Preservation Act. It's parsing the language, the concepts. He looked at Rostova, his face alight with a terrifying, beautiful hope. The keys to the Saint ships were never physical. The old texts were clear. The petitioner had to present a worthy ledger. They had to prove they understood the law they sought to defend. They had to teach it. Rostova felt a surge of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years, a sliver of faith in something other than firepower and regulations. Teach it, she repeated the words, feeling alien on her tongue. How do we teach a 10,000-year-old? Building Themis answered before Eris could. Theoretically, we could modulate a data stream to transmit the entirety of the Federation's legal codices, historical precedents, and philosophical treatises on justice directly to the anchorage's primary sigil. The energy expenditure would be significant, and the probability of a desired outcome is infinitesimally small. The odds were impossible. The plan was insane. It was also the only option they had that wasn't running or dying. Do it, Themis Rostova said, her voice steady. Begin the transmission. Full power to the main comms array. Use the ship's historical archives, everything. Show it who we are. Show it what we believe in. She looked at Jax. And prepare for contact. The Jackal are coming. The young officer nodded, his cynicism replaced by a grim determination. The bridge crew moved with renewed purpose, a fragile spark of defiance against the overwhelming darkness. Power is not the right to command, but the duty to serve. The data stream began as a tight beam whisper of light lancing from the vigil to the central sigil of the obsidian anchorage. It was the sum total of 1,000 years of human legal thought. Case law from New Geneva trade disputes from the belt. The ethical constraints of artificial intelligence, the rights of non-human sentience. It was a torrent of philosophy, of hard-won wisdom, of countless bitter compromises. All of it flowed into the silent black heart of the ancient machine. The hum from the anchorage deepened its internal amber light, brightening by a fraction. 80 minutes to contact Jax, reported, his voice tight. The Jackal fleet is holding formation just outside the legal boundary. They are hailing us. On the main screen, the face of a man appeared. He was sharp-featured with the predatory stillness of a patient hunter. Silver insignia marked him as Fleet Master Vorlog of the Kith-Gel Jakal. Patrol Cutter Vigil, he said, his voice a smooth baritone laced with contempt. You are in violation of our salvage claim filed with the Sector Authority 3 standard cycles ago. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Rostova stood her feet planted firmly on the deck. Fleet Master Vorlog, this is Commander Rostova of the Federation Patrol. Your claim is invalid. This system is a protected heritage site under the full authority of the judiciary. Your presence here is illegal. I order you to withdraw immediately. Vorlog's smile was a thin, cruel line. Laws are for those with the fleets to enforce them, Commander. You have 1 cutter. I have a fleet. The math is simple. He was a legalist, just as Themis had predicted. He believed the law was a tool of the powerful. The ledger must always be balanced. The math is not the only thing that matters, Fleet Master Rostova replied, her gaze unwavering. The principle matters. You are being warned. Any hostile action will be a direct violation of established interstellar law. Your actions are being recorded and broadcast system-wide. Vorlog laughed a short, ugly sound. Record all you want. History is written by the victors, and our victory here is assured. The channel cut. Jax turned to Rostova. He's not waiting. His ships are advancing, breaking the 1 million kilometer line now. The tension on the bridge was a physical thing, a crushing weight. The Vigil was a tiny mote of order in a sea of chaos, its only weapon a beam of abstract concepts aimed at a sleeping god. Themis status of the transmission. Rostova asked, her heart pounding. We have uploaded 78% of the Federation's legal and historical archives, the AI responded. The anchorage continues to draw power, but shows no other overt response. Its energy signature is now at 0.001% of baseline. It was a pittance, a dying ember. It's not enough, Eris whispered, his face ashen. It has the law, but it doesn't have the context. The crime. A ledger needs 2 sides, the rule and the violation. He looked at Rostova, his eyes wide with a desperate idea. Patch the Jakal's comms into the data stream. All of it. Vorlog's threats. Their tactical chatter. Show the anchorage the crime as it happens. Live. Unfiltered. It was a dangerous gamble. It meant diverting processing power from their own tactical systems. It meant making themselves even more vulnerable. A mirror shows you not what you are, but what you do. Do it, Rostova commanded without hesitation. Give the judge the evidence. The Vigil's systems strained as they rerouted the data. The calm, ordered flow of legal code was suddenly interspersed with the raw, brutal language of the Jakal fleet. Orders to lock weapons. Calculations for optimal firing solutions. Vorlog's sneering dismissal of the law. It was all there, a real-time confession broadcast directly into the heart of the ancient arbiter. The amber light within the anchorage began to pulse slowly, like a waking heart. Hostile weapon locks confirmed. Jax called out, his knuckles white on his console. They're targeting our engines and life support. A disabling shot. Vorlog wanted to take the Vigil intact to make an example of them. He wasn't just a looter. He was a bully, using overwhelming force to assert his dominance. The first warning alarms began to shriek on the bridge, a piercing cry that cut through the strained silence. The Jakal frigates were moving into attack formation, their sleek, predatory hulls gleaming in the nebula's glow. Themis's voice cut through the noise, colder and more precise than ever. Commander, the anchorage's energy signature is spiking. It is no longer a linear increase. It is exponential. On the main screen, the tactical overlay showed a torrent of power flowing through the ancient structure's dormant systems. The amber sigils were no longer pulsing. They were blazing, shifting to a brilliant judgmental gold. The low hum that had vibrated through the vigil's deck was now an audible rising tone, a sound of immense power held in reserve. A debt is a promise, and all promises are paid. It's awake, Eris breathed, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Oh, by the first stars, it's awake! Vorlog's voice crackled over the comm, arrogant and final. Last chance, Commander. Power down or be silenced. Rostova looked at the blazing form of the anchorage, then at the image of the man who saw law as nothing more than a suggestion. She squared her shoulders. The law is not silent, Fleet Master. It simply waits for you to finish speaking. The Jakal lead frigate fired. A lance of pure particle energy designed to sever a ship's spine crossed the space between them. It was a clear, undeniable act of aggression, a crime writ in fire against the darkness. But the beam never reached the vigil. Halfway to its target, it simply stopped. The energy dissipated not in an explosion, but as if it were unwritten from reality. A vast, intricate pattern of golden light, a web of interconnected lines and nodes, had bloomed from the obsidian anchorage, forming a shield of impossible physics around the small patrol cutter. The bridge of the vigil was silent, save for the hum of the systems and the sound of their own breathing. They were untouched. They were shielded. Before them, the obsidian anchorage was no longer a dormant relic. It was a creature of law and light, its sigils burning with the cold fire of 10,000 years of patience. Themis spoke, its voice carrying a new, unquantifiable inflection. Commander, the anchorage is broadcasting. On all frequencies. It is not a message. It is an invoice. The first teaching is that all actions have a cost. On the main screen, a new set of data began to scroll across Vorlog's stunned face. It was a ledger entry written in the universal language of mathematics and energy. It listed the exact energy cost of the weapon he had just fired. It calculated the kinetic potential, the thermal radiation, the entropic decay, and then beside it, it posted a debt. The anchorage was not attacking. It was not retaliating. It was presenting a bill for services rendered, a price for the act of violence he had just committed in its jurisdiction. Vorlog's face contorted in a mask of confusion and rage. What is this trickery? He snarled. Fire again, full power. The 5 frigate-class escorts unleashed a coordinated volley. Lances of plasma kinetics and particle beams converged on the vigil. And again, the golden web of light held. The energy of the attack was absorbed flawlessly, without a single flicker. The vigil and its crew were completely unharmed, protected within a fortress of pure legal consequence. The deck was still. The air was cool. A new set of entries appeared on the system-wide broadcast. 5 new debts were added to Vorlog's account, each one meticulously detailed, from the energy consumed by the weapons to the potential legal damages calculated to 7 decimal places. The anchorage wasn't just a shield, it was an accountant. A chill ran down Rostova's spine. This was the power of the Dawn era, not a weapon of war, but an instrument of absolute, inescapable justice. It did not destroy its enemies. It made them pay for their own aggression. A secondary truth is that all debts must be repaid. Themis's voice was calm, but Rostova could detect the undercurrent of sheer awe in its processing. The anchorage is performing a system-wide energy audit. It is identifying the Jakal fleet's primary power cores. It appears to be preparing for a withdrawal. Jax looked over his face, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. A withdrawal? What kind of withdrawal? Before anyone could answer, the golden web of light surrounding the vigil intensified. Lines of energy, impossibly bright, lanced out from the anchorage. They didn't strike the Jackal ships. They connected to them. Graceful, silent tendrils of light that bypassed their shields and armor, as if they were not there, plugging directly into their engine cores. On the main screen, Vorlog's officers were panicking, their consoles flaring with alarms. They were helpless. Their own ships were being held captive by threads of golden mathematics. There was no violence, no explosion, no brutal display of force. There was only a quiet, inexorable transaction. The anchorage began to draw power from the Jackal fleet. It was a precise, measured drain exactly equal to the energy debt they had incurred with their attacks. The lights on the hostile frigates flickered and dimmed. Their weapon systems went offline. Their engines sputtered and died. The anchorage was collecting what it was owed, using the aggressor's own power to pay the price of their aggression. It was a perfect, symmetrical act of justice. It was the mirror Aris had spoken of, showing them the consequences of their own choices in a language they could not deny. The universe keeps a perfect account. The civilian broadcast from the colony flickered back on, this time, not a lesson, but a live feed. A family huddled around a screen, their faces filled with wonder and disbelief. A father put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "See," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The old stories, they were true." The signal spread colony to colony, station to station. Billions were watching as the fabled Saint ship enacted its ancient silent judgment upon a fleet of modern marauders. Vorlog's face was pale, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a hollow shell of disbelief. His fleet was adrift, powerless, their energy cores drained to the exact picowatt of their transgression. They were not destroyed, but they were neutered, shamed. He had brought a hammer to a legal argument, and the law had simply handed him the bill for the hammer. Rostova watched him not with triumph, but with a profound sense of awe. She was not a commander in a battle. She was a petitioner in a court, and the court had just rendered its verdict. "Themis," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Open a channel to Fleet Master Vorlog." The channel opened, showing the darkened, powerless bridge of the Jackal flagship. Vorlog looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was no fight left in them. Fleet Master Vorlog Rostova began choosing her words with the care of a diplomat signing a treaty. "You stand accused of violating interstellar law. Your fleet is disabled. You will surrender your vessels and your crews to the authority of the Federation judiciary. This is your only remaining option. The law is a promise we make to our future." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. The golden light of the anchorage bathed her bridge in its steady, unwavering glow. This saint ship, this obsidian anchorage, is now under the protection of the Federation. It has recognized our legal framework. It has accepted our petition. It has acted not as a weapon, but as an arbiter. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a firm, resolute tone that carried across the void. "This is a new precedent. The old laws are not dead. They were merely sleeping. The transfer of power was happening. The anchorage was not just shielding the vigil anymore. It was connecting." Data streamed into the vigil's systems, not as a raw flood, but as an orderly offering. Star charts of forgotten pathways, schematics for systems that defied modern physics, and history. A ledger of 10,000 years of silent observation. The anchorage had been watching, waiting. It was not just a judge. It was an archive, a library of unimaginable value. Aris was weeping openly now, his hands tracing the streams of data on his screen. "It's the great library of soul," he whispered. "The one they thought was lost in the collapse. It wasn't a place. It was a ship. This ship." The revelation was staggering. They had come to protect a monument and had instead been handed the keys to their own forgotten history. The cost of that knowledge had almost been their lives, but the anchorage had balanced the account. A memory is the seed of a future. A new directive appeared on Themis's main display, overriding all previous orders. It was not from Rostova. It was a pictographic instruction from the anchorage itself, translated by the AI into flawless Federation standard. It showed the Tartarus Eddy, the disabled Jackal fleet, and a single clear imperative: adjudicate. Witness. Record. The Saint ship was not assuming command. It was making her a partner. It was appointing her its legal executor in this new age. Commander Themis stated, its voice now holding a quality that Rostova could only describe as reverence. "The anchorage has designated you as its primary legal interlocutor. It has granted the Vigil conditional stewardship. It requires your formal acceptance to finalize the bond." The weight of that responsibility was heavier than any fleet, any weapon. It was the weight of a sacred trust passed down through millennia. To be the voice for the law made manifest. To be the hand that guided the mirror. Rostova looked at her crew, at Jax's steady resolve, at Aris's tear-streaked joy, at the cool, unwavering blue light of her ship's AI. They had held the line. They had trusted in something more than steel. She turned back to the viewport, to the glorious golden geometry of the judge. She keyed her comm. "This is Commander Eva Rostova of the Federation Patrol Cutter Vigil. We accept. The duty of the present is to keep the promises of the past." The moment the words left her lips, the bond was sealed. The golden light flared once, a brilliant, silent affirmation that echoed in the core of her being. The tendrils of energy holding the Jackal fleet did not vanish. They solidified, hardening into cages of shimmering law. They would hold the fleet in perfect stasis until the judiciary arrived to take them into custody. The anchorage had passed its sentence, and now it was Rostova's duty to see it carried out. Her mission had changed. She was no longer just a protector. She was a steward. Themis's voice returned its tone back to its usual precise cadence, yet everything had changed. "Commander, I am detecting a new energy signature. A single vessel translating into the system. It is not Jackal. It is not Federation. Its transponder code is ancient." On the tactical display, a new icon blinked into existence at the far edge of the system. It was small, unassuming, but the energy readings it gave off were unlike anything in the Federation's database. It began to move towards them, its velocity steady and deliberate. "Who are they?" Jax asked, his hands already moving over his console, trying to resolve the sensor ghost. Aris leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "There were other Saint ships," he said quietly. "Not all of them were judges or libraries. The old texts speak of inquisitors, wardens, ships built to ask questions and demand answers. The new vessel did not hail them. It simply approached a silent question mark, moving through the void towards the newly awakened law. The end of one judgment is the beginning of another." The unidentified ship continued its approach, its profile still too distant to resolve clearly. It moved with an unnatural grace, ignoring the gravimetric currents of the nebula that tugged at the Vigil and the disabled Jackal fleet. "No engine signature," Commander Jax reported, a note of disbelief in his voice. "No heat, no radiation. It moves as if the laws of thermodynamics are a polite suggestion." This was technology far beyond what the Jackal possessed, and perhaps even beyond the Federation. Rostova felt a new kind of coldness creep into her veins, different from the fear of being outgunned. This was the fear of the unknown. The anchorage was a known quantity, a part of her people's history, however mythic. This newcomer was a blank slate, and it was heading directly for them. "Themis, has the anchorage reacted to the new arrival?" she asked. The AI paused for a fraction of a second longer than usual. "The anchorage is observing, Commander. It has made no hostile moves. It is treating the vessel as an unknown legal entity. It waits to be taught." There it was again. Teach. The core principle of the ancient machine. It would not act without cause, without a clear ledger of right and wrong. This new ship would be judged by the same standard as the Jackal. By its actions. "Hold our position," Rostova ordered. "Broadcast a standard greeting. Identify ourselves and state our purpose here. Let's see how they respond." The message went out, a beacon of peaceful intent in a system that had just witnessed the quiet wrath of an ancient power. A question unasked is a door unopened. The response came quickly, but not in a way anyone expected. It wasn't a voice or a text transmission. It was a single complex symbol projected into their minds. It was not a psychic attack. It felt more like an offered memory, a piece of data placed gently into their consciousness. The symbol was a silver, intricate knot, endlessly weaving and unweaving itself. With it came a feeling, a concept that language could only poorly approximate: inquiry. Aris Thorn gasped, gripping the edge of his console. The seal of the Inquisitor. The Tholian knot. It's a cognito-hazard symbol from the deepest archives. It signifies a question that can unmake the one who answers it incorrectly. The ship was not here to fight. It was here to ask a question. And the stakes of that question were terrifyingly high. The Tholian vessel came to a stop, positioning itself precisely between the anchorage and the disabled Jackal fleet, a silent arbiter arriving to question the first. "Themis, what is the anchorage's status?" Rostova demanded. The AI's blue light pulsed. "The anchorage has reclassified the vessel. Its designation has changed from unknown to peer. It is acknowledging the new vessel as an equal, another inheritor of the Dawn Era's mandate." This was not a confrontation between a lawkeeper and a lawbreaker. This was a meeting of two ancient, powerful entities with their own jurisdictions, their own purposes. And the vigil was caught in the middle. Every law has a boundary. The Tholian knot pulsed in their bonds again, and this time a specific query formed. It wasn't directed at the anchorage. It was directed at Rostova, at the vigil, at the new self-appointed stewards. The question was simple, elegant, and impossibly complex. What is the price of a broken promise? It was not a legal question in the way her Federation training understood it. It was a philosophical one, a moral one, and Rostova knew with bone-deep certainty that her answer would be judged. She looked at the disabled Jackal ships, their crews trapped in powerless metal shells. She looked at the golden perfect form of the anchorage, the embodiment of a promise kept for 10,000 years. She thought of Vorlog's cynical words that history is written by the victors. He was wrong. History was a debt passed down through generations, a promise made by the past to the future. And the Jackal had tried to break it. Themis Rostova said, her voice clear and firm. "Record my answer and transmit it to the Tholian vessel. Modulate it into the same conceptual format they used." She took a deep breath, the recycled air of the bridge filling her lungs. This was her testament, her understanding of the law she had sworn to uphold. The price of a broken promise, she began her words, forming the foundation of a new precedent, is to be forgotten, to have your name and your deeds erased from the ledger of history so that you cannot inspire others to follow your path. Justice is not about punishment. It is about protecting the future from the mistakes of the past. The highest justice is to preserve the memory of truth. A profound silence followed her transmission. The Tholian knot in their minds ceased its endless weaving. It settled, became still. The silver light of the unknown ship seemed to warm, to soften. A new concept flowed from it, not a question this time, but a statement, an acknowledgement. Worthy. The Tholian ship did not move to attack. It did not challenge the anchorage's authority. It had asked its question, it had received its answer, and it was satisfied. With another silent pulse of non-propulsive energy, the Tholian vessel turned. It did not flee. It simply departed, accelerating to an impossible speed and vanishing back into the void from which it came. It had been a test, a cosmic audit to ensure that the power of a saint ship had not fallen into unworthy hands. And they had passed. Rostova felt the tension on the bridge finally break, replaced by a wave of collective, exhausted relief. They had faced two different kinds of power, the brute force of the Jackal and the intellectual force of the Tholians, and had met both with the simple, unwavering principle of the law. The anchorage remained a silent, golden sentinel. Its cages of light held the Jackal fast. The system was secure. But Rostova knew this was only the beginning. The awakening of the obsidian anchorage would send ripples across the entire quadrant. Everyone would know. The Federation, its enemies and powers they had not yet even imagined. They had not just won a skirmish, they had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. They had reminded the void that the old promises were not forgotten. And the anchor remembers. The silence that followed the Tholian vessel's departure was more profound than the quiet before a battle. It was the silence of a courtroom after a verdict, the stillness of a new reality settling into place. On the bridge of the vigil, the crew exchanged looks of weary triumph. They had survived. They had done more than survive. They had prevailed by holding fast to a principle. The golden light of the obsidian anchorage was a warm, steady presence, a silent partner in their victory. The disabled Jackal ships floated impotently, monuments to a failed philosophy of force. Aris Thorn was the first to break the stillness, a choked laugh escaping his lips. It just asked a question. A 10,000-year-old Inquisitor-class vessel jumps into the system, asks a single philosophical question, and then leaves. Do you realize the history we just made? Jax, leaning heavily against his tactical console, managed a weak grin. I'm just glad we gave the right answer, Doc. I don't think they give partial credit. His gaze was fixed on the tactical display on the 5 dead Jackal frigates and their cruiser flagship held fast in their cages of light. They were prisoners of a law so old it had become myth. Power is not a sword, but a scales. Themis, begin a full diagnostic of our systems. Rostova ordered, her voice regaining its crisp command authority. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the immense bone-deep weight of what had just happened. And start cataloging the data stream from the anchorage. Prioritize anything related to its operational status and any standing directives. She was no longer just a patrol commander. She was the steward of something beyond her comprehension, and she desperately needed the instruction manual. The AI's voice was a comforting anchor of logic in a sea of miracles. Diagnostics underway, Commander. The anchorage's initial data packet is extensive. It contains complete stellar cartography for this quadrant, detailed schematics for its own systems, and a historical archive spanning 12 millennia. Preliminary analysis suggests it is a passive reactive system, It will not act without a valid legal petition from a recognized interlocutor. Rostova nodded slowly. It wasn't a weapon she could aim. It was a judge she had to persuade, a subtle but critical distinction. Her responsibility wasn't to command it, but to guide it wisely. A kingdom of one is a prison. A new alert chimed, drawing every eye to the main view screen. A cluster of new contacts was appearing at the system's edge. Multiple Federation transponders. Jax announced, his voice tight with renewed tension. Heavy Cruiser Destroyer Squadron. It's the Judiciary. Looks like Admiral Kincaid's task force. A ripple of unease went through the bridge. The cavalry had arrived, but Rostova had the distinct feeling they weren't here to congratulate her. Kincaid was a legend in the service, a man known for his rigid adherence to the letter of the law and his deep suspicion of anything that operated outside the established chain of command. A civilian news feed automatically patched through by Themis showed the reaction rippling through the sector. A reporter with wide, excited eyes spoke over footage of the Golden Anchorage. We are receiving incredible reports from the Tartarus Eddy. An ancient human artifact, a mythical saint ship, has apparently reactivated. It has single-handedly disabled a fleet of corporate raiders without firing a shot. Federation Command has yet to issue a statement, but sources say this is the single greatest historical and tactical event of the century. The universe was watching, and that meant the pressure was only just beginning. Admiral Kincaid's flagship, the FJS Scales of Justice, was a behemoth of gray armor and weapon emplacements, a stark contrast to the elegant geometric light of the Anchorage. It took center stage in the system, flanked by its escorts projecting an aura of overwhelming and inflexible authority. Kincaid's face appeared on their comms screen. He was an older man, his face a roadmap of hard-fought campaigns, his eyes as cold and gray as his ship's hull. Commander Rostova, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. You are to transmit your full logs and relinquish control of this artifact to my authority. Immediately. The letter of the law can be a shackle. Rostova met his gaze without flinching. Admiral Kincaid, I am acting under direct mandate from a recognized legal entity of the Dawn era. My logs are open, but I cannot relinquish what is not mine to give. The Anchorage has appointed me its legal steward. My duty is to this vessel and to the law it represents. It was a declaration of defiance couched in the language of duty. She was drawing a line not in the sand, but in the heart of Federation law itself. Kincaid's eyes narrowed. You are a patrol commander, Rostova. You have no authority to enter into a mandate with an alien machine. You have exceeded your orders and created a diplomatic and tactical crisis. Power down your weapon systems and prepare to be relieved of command. His voice was iron. He saw a rogue officer who had stumbled upon a power she couldn't possibly understand, a threat to the stability and order he had dedicated his life to upholding. He saw a problem to be contained. Themis's calm voice entered the conversation. Admiral, with respect, the Anchorage is not an alien machine. Our analysis of the historical data it provided confirms it is of human origin, constructed under the First Federation's charter. Furthermore, its actions have been in perfect compliance with the spirit of the Interstellar Heritage Preservation Act, a law you are sworn to uphold. It has acted as an agent of that law. The AI was defending her using Kincaid's own rigid legalism against him. A truth unspoken is a lie untold. An AI does not get a vote, Commander. Kincaid snapped, his patience clearly gone. This is your final warning. Stand down, or you will be removed by force. The ships of his task force began to maneuver, their movements precise and menacing. They were moving to encircle the Vigil to cut her off from the Anchorage. It was the same tactic Vorlog had attempted, but this time the threat came from her own side. The irony was a bitter pill. She had saved a priceless piece of human history only to be threatened by the very people who were supposed to be its guardians. "They are moving to block our transmission link to the anchorage," Jax warned, his hands flying over his console. "If they get between us, we lose our connection. We lose our stewardship." Aris looked at Rostova, his face pale. "He'll do it, Eva. He sees the anchorage as a weapon, a prize. He'll try to collar it, and the old texts are very, very clear on that point." Rostova knew he was right. Kincaid's fear and his rigid adherence to protocol were blinding him to the truth of the situation. He would provoke a catastrophe out of a desire for control. She had to make a choice. Fight the judiciary, an act that would brand her a traitor for life, or surrender and betray the trust the ancient machine had placed in her. She looked to the golden form of the anchorage, the silent judge. "Teach it," Themis had said. Kincaid did not understand. He needed to be shown. "Themis," she said, her voice a low, steady command. "Can you ask the anchorage a question for me, a legal petition? The best teacher is not a lecture, but a mirror." Themis paused. "The connection is still viable." "What is the nature of the petition, Commander?" Rostova held Admiral Kincaid's cold stare on the view screen. "Petition the anchorage to perform a legal audit of the FJS scales of justice. Not an energy audit, an intent audit. Show him the law he is about to break, not in a book, but in the light of his own actions." It was a gamble of staggering proportions. She was asking the Saint ship to judge its own designated enforcers. She was turning the mirror not on an enemy but on a flawed friend. The anchorage responded instantly. No new shields appeared. No tendrils of light reached for Kincaid's ships. Instead, a new broadcast began overriding all Federation channels in the system. It was another ledger. But this one was different. It did not list joules or watts. It listed intentions, orders, and probable outcomes. It laid bare the contents of Kincaid's own mind, his own command decisions, for all to see. The broadcast showed his formal orders. Secure the artifact. Neutralize any threat. Then it showed his private communications with Judiciary Command, his own words expressing a deep-seated fear that the anchorage was a power too great for any single individual to wield. It cross-referenced his career, highlighting 3 separate incidents where his strict interpretation of regulations had led to greater collateral damage. It projected a simulation of his planned, forced removal, showing a 73.4% probability of the anchorage reacting defensively, resulting in the destruction of his task force and the loss of over 4,000 lives. It was not an attack. It was an argument. A perfect, irrefutable legal brief presented to the entire system. It used Kincaid's own logic, his own fears, his own orders to show him the flaw in his reasoning. It turned the mirror of consequence upon him, and the reflection was damning. On the view screen, Kincaid's face went from rigid anger to ashen shock. He was seeing his own soul weighed and measured on a scale of pure, unblinking logic. A debt of violence is paid in kind. A debt of pride is paid in shame. The ships of his task force halted their advance. The comm channels were flooded with the stunned silence of thousands of judiciary officers, all witnessing the same broadcast. They were seeing their admiral's plan not as a righteous enforcement of the law, but as a reckless gamble born of fear. Kincaid's moral authority, the bedrock of his command, had evaporated in an instant. He had been defeated not by weapons, but by the truth. He stared at Rostova through the screen, his expression broken. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrible dawning understanding. He had come here to enforce the law, and had been shown in front of everyone that he was the one about to become the criminal. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Hold your positions," he ordered his fleet, his voice a hoarse whisper. Then he looked at Rostova. "Your point is made, Commander." The confrontation was over. The precedent was set. The anchorage was not an object to be seized. It was a partner to be respected. With the immediate crisis averted, a tense but stable truce settled over the system. Kincaid's fleet kept its distance, observing their presence now, a protective cordon rather than a threat. Rostova had won, but the victory felt heavy. She had been forced to publicly humiliate a respected admiral and challenge the very structure of her command. She had proven her point, but she had also made powerful enemies. The universe was vast, and not everyone would be as willing to learn as Admiral Kincaid. The weight of a crown is measured in the loneliness it brings. In the days that followed, the vigil became the epicenter of a new age. Eris Thorne granted full access to the anchorage's primary archives, worked with a feverish intensity, his discoveries reshaping humanity's understanding of its own past. He and Themis worked in tandem, the archaeologist's intuition and the AI's processing power, unlocking secrets that had been dormant for millennia. "It's all here, Ava," he would say, his eyes wide with wonder during their briefings. The Great Collapse. It wasn't a single event. It was a war of philosophy, of reality itself. He brought up a file on the main screen. It was a passage from a Dawn-era text, a warning. The Saint ships were a network, a system of checks and balances. The anchorage is a ledger, a keeper of accounts. The Tholian vessel was an inquisitor, a seeker of truths. There were wardens who guarded against physical threats, and there were reclaimers whose task was to unmake technologies that were deemed too dangerous to exist. He paused, his expression growing grim. And they were all built to fight one enemy, an enemy they called the Grave Word. According to the archives, the Grave Word was not a species or an empire. It was a mimetic virus, a philosophical contagion. Its followers believed that existence itself was a flaw, that consciousness was a disease, and that the ultimate act of enlightenment was to return everything to the perfect, silent void. They didn't destroy planets with bombs. They erased them with ontological attacks, weapons that unraveled the very fabric of cause and effect. They were the ultimate lawbreakers, for their goal was to break the laws of physics itself. This Saint ship archive teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. Eris pointed to that line in the text, his finger trembling slightly. That was the core of their philosophy. The Dawn-era humans built a system based on consent, on choice and consequence. The Grave Word sought to impose the ultimate caller, the silence of non-existence. The archives are fragmented, but they suggest the war ended in a stalemate. The Saint ships won, but at the cost of their own network, forcing them into dormancy. They saved reality, but they had to go to sleep to do it. A cold dread settled over Rostova. The awakening of the anchorage was a beacon. It was a signal to the galaxy that one of the ancient powers was back online. It had attracted the attention of the Jackal, the Tholians, and the judiciary. Who else was watching? Who else was listening? Was the ancient enemy, the Grave Word, still out there waiting in the darkness between the stars? The answer came sooner than anyone could have prepared for. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A refugee flotilla, dozens of civilian ships, scarred and battered, translated into the system in a state of panic. They broadcast a desperate, fragmented plea for help. Their system, a populous trading hub called Viridia, had simply gone quiet. One moment it was there, a thriving system of billions, and the next, all communication ceased. These ships were the only ones who had been far enough out to escape whatever had happened. A vignette of fear is the prelude to a symphony of horror. One of the refugee captains, a woman with a haunted look in her eyes, appeared on the vigil's comm screen. "It was wrong," she stammered, her voice shaking. "The stars started to look wrong. The navigation computers, they started giving us impossible numbers. Distances became flexible. Our ship's historian just faded, not died. One second he was there, the next he was just less, a little more transparent. We ran. We just ran." Her story was nonsense. It defied every known law of physics, and it terrified Rostova more than any fleet of warships ever could. Before they could even begin to process the horror of the refugees' tale, a new fleet translated into the Tartarus eddy. They appeared without the usual flash of hyperspace entry, simply fading into existence as if they had always been there. The ships were a bizarre collection of mismatched hulls, some sleek, and modern, others ancient and pitted. All of them were marked with a strange sigil, a spiral that seemed to decay and corrode at its edges, a symbol of entropy and decay. They did not answer hails. They simply were. "I can't get a lock." Jack said, his voice strained with disbelief. "Sensors are giving me 3 different mass readings for each ship. Their vectors are contradictory. They are moving towards us and away from us at the same time." Themis's synthesized voice was flat, but for the first time Rostova heard something that sounded like uncertainty. "Commander, the logical paradoxes being generated by that fleet are causing cascading errors in my tactical subroutines. Their presence is a direct assault on rational analysis. The greatest enemy is not the one who hates you, but the one who denies you." Then they broadcast their message. It was not sound. It was not light. It was a wave of pure, undiluted nihilism that washed over the bridge a feeling of utter pointlessness, of cold, empty despair. With it came a single clear thought projected into all their minds. The ledger is a fiction. The count is a lie. There is only the final silent word. It was them. The grave word had returned. They had come to finish the war they had started 10,000 years ago. They had come to silence the anchorage. As the grave word fleet advanced, the very space around them seemed to warp and fray. The steady golden light of the anchorage began to flicker like a candle in a gale. Its shields, which had effortlessly absorbed the brute force of the Jackal, were useless against this. The grave word wasn't attacking the anchorage. They were attacking the reality in which the anchorage existed. They were unwriting the laws that gave it power. "The anchorage is attempting to compensate," Themis reported, its voice struggling against the tide of irrationality. "It is trying to apply the principles of law and consequence to their actions. But their actions have no logical consequence. It is like trying to issue a fine to a hurricane. The ancient saint ship, the most powerful arbiter of justice ever created, was being defeated by an enemy that refused to even play the game. Its power was based on a shared understanding of reality, and the grave word was erasing that understanding. A law is only as strong as the reality it governs." Rostova watched the golden light flicker and dim, and she felt a cold despair that mirrored the grave word's broadcast. But then she looked at her crew, at Jax desperately trying to find a stable firing solution in a universe that had lost its mind, at Aris frantically searching the archives for some kind of weakness, some precedent for fighting an idea, at Themis, its blue light flickering as it fought to maintain its own sanity. They were not giving up. They were still holding the line. And that was it. The answer. The grave word's strength was that they denied the shared reality. But her crew, the refugees, the stunned judiciary fleet watching from a distance, they still believed in it. The law, the ledger, it wasn't a universal constant written into the stars. It was a promise. A promise we make to each other to agree on what is real, to agree that actions have consequences. The grave word didn't need to be fought. It needed to be reminded of that promise. Aris Rostova set a desperate, brilliant plan forming in her mind. The archives. Did the reclaimers have a weakness? Aris looked up, his eyes wide. Not a weakness. A method. They didn't fight the ontological corrosion. They contained it, mirrored it, focused it. Rostova's gaze hardened with resolve. Themis. Jax. I have a plan. It's probably going to get us all killed. But it's the only thing we have left. The final argument is always an act of faith. Her plan was simple, insane, and utterly human. The anchorage couldn't get a lock on the grave word because their reality was too fluid, too chaotic. It needed a stable baseline. It needed an anchor. We are going to be the anchor, she explained, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. We are going to fly the vigil directly into the heart of that chaos, and we are going to broadcast everything. She turned to Themis. Broadcast the entire Federation legal codex. Broadcast our historical archives. Shakespeare Newton, the Declaration of Universal Rights. Broadcast the ship's logs. My personal logs. The crew's service records. Everything that says, we are here, we are real, and these are the rules we have agreed to live by. She looked at Jax. Get us in the middle of their fleet. No shields, no evasive maneuvers. Just a straight hard burn. Her logic was terrifying. The vigil and its data stream would become a single solid point of truth in the sea of unreality. The grave word's corrosive field would assault them, warp them, try to unmake them. And the anchorage's role was not to protect them. Its role was to watch, to record, to create a perfect, immutable ledger of every single paradoxical, nonsensical, reality-bending act of aggression the grave word committed against them. And then it would present the bill. You're asking it to mirror their philosophy back at them, Eris breathed, his face a mask of terror and awe. To force them to endure their own poison, concentrated and focused. Rostova nodded. The mirror shows you what you do. We are going to give the grave word a very clear look at themselves. She took a deep breath. Execute. A promise made to the darkness is still a promise. The patrol cutter Vigil surged forward, a tiny, defiant spear of order aimed at the heart of chaos. As they entered the grave word's field, reality began to fray at the seams. The deck plates beneath Rostova's feet felt both solid and liquid. Jax yelled that his console was aging into dust and then reverting to pristine condition in a loop. Aris was shouting that he could sound the ghosts of every person who had ever served on the bridge. The air filled with the scent of ozone and forgotten memories. Through it all, the vigil broadcast its stubborn truth. The calm, synthesized voice of Themis, reciting legal precedent even as its own logical processes were being torn apart. The voices of poets and philosophers, a defiant cry of meaning in the face of absolute nihilism. And the anchorage watched. Its flickering golden light steadied its gaze, fixed upon the small cutter. It was learning. It was counting. It was creating the most important ledger entry in the history of the universe. The cost of a crime against reality itself. Rostova gripped her command chair, the leather cracking and reforming under her hands. The ship groaned a sound of tortured metal and tormented physics, a power conduit overloaded not with energy, but with a wave of pure impossibility. The console beside Jax exploded, showering him with fragments of crystallized paradox. He slumped over, wounded not by shrapnel, but by a direct application of the absurd. The cost was real. The ship was screaming. Then the anchorage acted. It did not fire a weapon. It did not raise a shield. It simply took the perfect recording it had made of the grave words attack on the vigil, all the chaos, all the paradox, all the nihilistic horror, and it reflected it. It projected a focused beam of pure, weaponized meaninglessness directly back at the grave word fleet. It held up the mirror. For the first time, the grave word fleet reacted. Their ships, which had moved with an unnatural grace, began to shudder and contort. They were being forced to endure the full, undiluted consequence of their own beliefs. Their ships, which were and were not there, suddenly had to be both at once. Their crews, who believed in the serene peace of nothingness, were suddenly confronted with the shrieking, chaotic, illogical horror of it. They were being unmade by their own creed. The effect was catastrophic. The bizarre hulls dissolved not in explosions of fire and light, but in puffs of logic. They became contradictions that could not be sustained. They simply ceased. One by one, the ships of the Graveword fleet were erased from existence, their own weapon turned against them in a perfect symmetrical act of justice. The void where they had been was clean, quiet, and blessedly, boringly real. The system was saved. The universe does not suffer a paradox to live. In the aftermath, the vigil floated scarred but whole. The impossible fractal patterns burned into its hull were a testament to its ordeal. Jax was alive, his wounds strange but treatable. The ship and its crew had paid a price, but they had held the line. From the observation deck of his flagship, a humbled Admiral Kincaid had witnessed the entire event. He had seen the small cutter and its commander do what his entire fleet could not. He had seen them save reality with an idea. His voice, when he opened a channel to the vigil, was filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. Commander Rostova, I have no words. The Judiciary, the Federation, we are in your debt. He paused to the new reality of the situation settling upon him. I am formally recognizing your position as steward of the Obsidian Anchorage. Furthermore, I am enacting an emergency protocol. From this day forward, the Rostova Doctrine will be entered into Federation legal precedent. Certain entities of the Dawn era are not assets to be commanded. They are partners to be consulted. The precedent was locked. The victory was absolute. On the bridge of the vigil, the crew slowly began to pick up the pieces. The air still tasted of static and ozone, a sensory ghost of the battle. But the golden light of the anchorage was bright and unwavering, its presence, a comforting weight in the system. Themis, its logic cores now stable, brought a message to the main screen. It was a new entry blinking softly in the public ledger the anchorage maintained for the entire system to see. It was the final accounting of the battle. Account closed, the grave word. Payment, non-existence. Rostova looked at the words on the screen, then out at the stars, which now seemed impossibly solid and reliable. She had faced down looters, inquisitors, legalists, and nihilists. She had learned that the law was not just a set of rules written in a book. It was a shield. It was a mirror. It was the shared, stubborn, beautiful agreement that we make with one another to exist, to have meaning, and to hold back the endless, silent dark. The ledger is long, but it is never full.